Hey everyone, Steven here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. So last month I couldn't help but notice a little trend going on within the booktube community called Vamptember, where a lot of our fellow booktubers decided to make a list of their favorite vampire books that they have either read throughout the month or just in general overall. I am not super well versed within the vampire subgenre, mainly because when I was first really getting into horror, a lot of the classic monsters just kind of bored me. I felt they were just very cliche and just honestly not scary. You know, vampires and Frankenstein and werewolves and stuff like that. So I really didn't start learning to appreciate vampires until after I read Salem's Lot by Stephen King, and then on to Dracula by Bram Stoker, and now I love vampire stories. So, unfortunately, I didn't participate within that month simply because I don't really have enough experience with vampire novels to even make a decent list of my favorite ones that isn't within everybody else's. So I kind of wanted to take a little spin of my own and start a month I'd like to call Zombtober, where I'm going to list 5 zombie novels that I really think break the mold within the genre. So before I get started, I just ask that you drop a quick like on the video, as it does help push it out into the algorithm and spread the awareness. So, zombies. I can't really pinpoint when my interest in zombies started. I barely remember, watching Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. I think I really started to like zombies after I watched Zombieland and my favorite zombie movie, Shaun of the Dead. I think that's where I really started to like zombies, and kind of how that particular subgenre has a lot of things that I like within horror itself, where, it has a lot of amazing characters, sort of this look into society as, the rules of basic human nature are broken. I shouldn't say basic human nature. I guess the rules of society no longer exist, and it's all basically every man out for themselves at this point. But with that, the zombie genre is massively flooded between movies and books and games, and it's one of the most, if not probably the most, celebrated subgenre within horror. I personally can't think of another subgenre that has more entries into it than zombies. So it can feel very overwhelming, and at other times can be just kind of a zombie fatigue. It feels like things start to run the same tropes, same characters, things like that. So I wanted to pinpoint 5 zombie books that I feel stand out among the rest of the horde of zombie books. So anyway, let's get started. The first book I wanted to pinpoint is probably not super uncommon, but I still think deserves a shout out because it does highlight a lot of things I enjoy within the zombie genre. And that book is none other than World War Z by Max Brooks. So this book is nothing like the terrible movie adaptation that was released. World War Z is actually an epistolary tale about the Great Zombie War, where humankind fought against the zombie outbreak. And what I think really makes World War Z shine amongst other zombie books is that it's a tale of humans overcoming the virus. Like, we win in the end. Like, it's told, it's a bunch of interviews with survivors during the war, people who, were not involved in the war, but civilians and things like that. And not just within the United States. It's all over the world. Like, we get such an in-depth look at how different cultures would handle the zombie apocalypse, and it's so fascinating to see how other countries would handle this sort of situation. Within the zombie subgenre, it's always 99% of the time takes place within America. So, we know how Americans would sort of take that, but how would China handle this, or Africa, or, even, some other smaller countries within the world. So it's really interesting to get a perspective of other countries and climates to see how they would handle this outbreak. I also really love that the zombies sort of take a back seat within the story. Like, they're present. Obviously they're the main crisis within the story, but it focuses a lot on the humans and how our society, like how people handle trauma differently. Like, one of my favorite chapters within the book is this interview with a woman who was so traumatized by the events she experienced, she regressed mentally back to an 8-year-old girl. And she explains how, her and her family were basically stuck on the highway when the outbreak was first starting. And, they basically started this small community on the side of the highway where people got together, they shared their food, their supplies, things like that. Because everyone sort of assumed, hey, we're America, we got this, this will be done within 2 weeks, we'll be back to normal, and da-da-da. Almost sort of like how COVID happened with us. We thought, within 2 weeks we'd all be normal, and lo and behold, 5-6 years later, we're still really feeling the effects of it. So, and then as 2 weeks go by, we start to see the community start to crumble. People stop being friendly. The weekly cookouts stop, and, people are starting to break into other trailers to steal food, and it's just really horrific what ends up happening in the end. So, yeah, and it honestly has probably one of my most favorite quotes in horror ever. And to paraphrase, basically, it says, "That's when I heard the screaming, the crying, women and children. And it didn't matter that we couldn't understand their language. Nobody can misunderstand the sounds of human suffering." And I think that's just such a powerful quote where, especially in a time now where we're so divided, that beneath our skin and our beliefs, we're all humans trying to make the best of the life we have to live. So it gives me a little bit of hope that within times of crisis, we would band together, not even as America, but as human beings, to ensure our species continues to thrive and survive. So yes, easily one of the pinnacles in zombie novels, but it definitely deserves a spot on my list. Alrighty. So the next book I want to highlight is called Day by Day Armageddon by J.L. Bourne. Cool little cover there. I actually discovered this book back, probably 2014 I discovered this book. It was actually gifted to me by a coworker and one of my great friends who's also very much into horror. More so movies than books and anything else. Excuse me, I just had my breakfast, so a little gassy there. But he would notice that I was always reading Stephen King books at my desk and things like that, and he recommended this book to me. And I absolutely loved it. This happens to actually be part of a trilogy. I haven't read the other 2 books in it. I really should get around to it because I haven't read it since 2014, 2015. But Day by Day Armageddon is yet another epistolary tale of a retired military veteran who is keeping a journal on New Year's Day to sort of help cope with settling back into civilian life. When the zombie outbreak starts to happen, and he is essentially it's essentially it has possibly one of the only living records of the zombie outbreak as it happened. And it goes into this great detail of him. I genuinely don't even remember what his goal is. I think basically just trying to find refuge within the zombie apocalypse. So it's really interesting to see his adventures told through these diary entries. And it was really my first time kind of being introduced to epistolary tales and how much I loved them, because it was like, it felt like if I had been walking down the street or even scanning the shelves of a library and just pulled this off and was like, maybe this shouldn't be here. What is this? So it's just really well told. I love all the adventure within it. I can't really remember a lot of specific details. Like I said, it's been 10 years since I've read it, but it's always a book that genuinely stands out when I think of zombie books to recommend. It also has like a lot of military jargon, but it does so in a way that brings you into it. It doesn't expect you to know the terms and everything. It explains it to you in layman's term without breaking the immersion of the story. So, yeah, I absolutely recommend checking out Day by Day Armageddon by J. L. Bourne. It is a really, really good zombie tale. Third on my list is easily one of the most unique takes on zombies I have ever read before. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, I'm sure you've heard me mention it before. But the next book I want to point out is I Am a Hero by Kengo Hanazawa, which is a manga. So what really makes I Am a Hero stand out is that our protagonist is a paranoid schizophrenic who suffers from hallucinations. So it blends the world of a schizophrenic into the zombie apocalypse. And it makes for, like, imagine Alice in Wonderland with zombies. It makes for some of the trippiest imagery I've ever seen in any comic form. There's just, let me point out there's this really great scene that really trips me up every time. Just the scene itself is so, it just gives me the goosebumps. Let me see if I can find it. I know it's very early on in the book. But it's one of the first times where you can kind of see the state of mind our protagonist is in. And that it's constantly this, basically you're questioning your own sanity here. Like, what is actually going on? Here it is. So this scene right here where he's in his bedroom, you can just see the face and the blinds, and something about it just completely unsettles me, and I love it. But I'll show one more scene that's really great in here. This is just some of the most beautiful artwork I've ever seen. And the manga is in black and white, but it does have these rare pages of color that really make them pop out when they appear. And you can just see, the attention to detail is unlike any other art medium that I know of. I love manga, the excruciating attention to detail and patience that it takes, but then you get things like this. Like, I would get this scanned and framed and hang it up in my library. I love this. But anyway, another interesting thing is, not only is he a paranoid schizophrenic, he's also one of the only people in Japan to own a gun during this time. So, you've got a paranoid schizophrenic with a firearm running around during a zombie apocalypse, not able to tell who's a zombie and who isn't. So, and I love the scenes where, he's interacting with someone, and it just turns into them being a zombie, and it's it just adds this really great shock factor throughout the story that keeps you guessing, because it does it a couple of times, but in a way that when it jumps to the next page, it could be he's facing a zombie, but it's actually a survivor. So it really, like I said, it adds this really nice element of confusion to the story that brings the reader into the character's frame of mind. And you're just like, it adds this intensity when there's like very heavy character interaction, and you can start to see it scale up like this. You're like, oh God, like, is this person he talking to real? Because it keeps jumping between zombie and survivor. So, yeah, I haven't read the entire series. I'm pretty sure there's something like 10 or 12 books in the series. They're very expensive, so slowly but surely I will own all of them, because I really need to see how this series ends. But if you love manga and you're looking for something different, absolutely check out I Am a Hero. It is amazing. I believe there's actually a movie adaptation as well that I will check out, absolutely. Let's see. Alrighty, so number 2 here. I guess scaling down 5, 4, 3, 2. Next up is Wetwork by Philip Nutman, which I actually have reviewed on the channel. I'll go ahead and leave a link to that in the description below. So, Wetwork. Extremely interesting take on zombies. Imagine if the creator of James Bond decided to dump James Bond into a zombie apocalypse, and you have Wetwork. It's really fun. That's the best word I can use to describe this book, is fun. It starts off with a really intense scene of like this group of like government assassins taking out going on a mission basically. And it obviously goes wrong with, their targets already being dead and one of them having turned into a zombie. So it kind of just goes on through there. So it's a lot of espionage, assassination stuff. But what really is interesting about it is the zombies themselves, where they're sentient. They're not mindless creatures. They have their own. You see them start to evolve into zombies that learn to talk and function and things like that. So it's interesting to see that. Another thing that I really, really love is that it has this great scene where our main character actually turns into a zombie, and it goes through the process of not only him dying, but him turning into a zombie. And I've never read that in any other zombie novel I've ever read, where it's such this hauntingly beautiful telling of death in this fascinating process of coming back to life. Like, it's just unlike anything I've ever read before, and it gave me goosebumps. Both scenes, the death and the resurrection turning into a zombie. It was so fascinating just to see our main character, like, how the process of the virus goes within the human body, and how, like, he comes back to life from sort of this nothingness that he's aware of, but it is almost this purgatory. So it's just a really fun, like I said, fun novel overall, with interesting zombies, some great action scenes, in like I said, some of the best prose within dying and resurrection that I've ever read within a book. So definitely check out Wetwork by Philip Nutman. Highly recommend. And of course, check out the review down in the link below to see my full thoughts on the book. And last but absolutely not least, the next book, and probably at the top of my list, is going to be The Rising by Brian Keene. So Brian Keene is an author which I have a lot of books by, but he was an author I never really dove into. I was still back in the time. This was probably, 2022, probably 2023, maybe around that time, where I was still focusing more on like 80s and 90s horror. But one day while I was working and I had an Audible credit, I was in the mood for a zombie story. So I kind of was browsing the selection when I came across The Rising by Brian Keene. And, I read the summary. It seemed pretty interesting. So I downloaded it and started to listen. And at first, I wasn't completely gripped. The characters felt a little too cliche for my taste. Like it felt definitely a little too cliche at first, but as the story starts to unravel, the characters start to blossom into these amazing complex characters. Like there's one character, I can't remember her name, but she's a drug addict and she's running away from this gang that she owes money to. And she was easily my least favorite character in the story, just because it was like, I'm usually not really a fan of like the drug addict story arc within stories. It's not for me. But to see how she evolved throughout the story from this drug addict to this really cool badass character, that it was really awesome. It made her really fun. Another thing that I really enjoyed with the story is that, again, the zombies are sentient, but instead of learning to develop into a species, they have their old personalities back. They still have their thought processes, their personalities, everything. They have their memories and things like that. They're just simply undead. And what ends up being the overall conflict within this story is that now the zombies essentially turn into an army. They form into an army of the undead. They start to take over the world, where now it becomes, humans are now corralled like wildlife, like farm animals. They keep women and children separate as, their meals, essentially, because they have more succulent meat, while men are forced into slave labor and things like that. But what's really awesome is to see, like, as the zombies are succeeding and essentially have succeeded and have enslaved the rest of humanity, we start to see this sort of Animal Farm-esque story start to unfold, where the higher-ranking zombies are starting to disagree on how they want to move forward as a species, which then gives the humans, their chance at resistance. So it's just a lot of fun to see, like, given that even with this ultimate immortality, human beings are ultimately going to be their own self-destruction because of our thought processes and our own inner selfishness. But our main character's story is that he is traveling to find his son across the country. Like, he ends up getting, I can't remember if he gets a phone call from his son or something. He ends up finding out that his son is alive somewhere. Oh, with his ex-wife. That's what it is. I'm starting to remember now. His son is with his ex-wife states away. So he's traveling across the country to go save his son. And very Walking Dead-esque, actually. So, but the ending of the book, man, the ending is so good. The ending was so good, I literally bought the sequel on the audiobook directly after I was finished. And I never, especially with series, I almost never get into the second book. But the way the first one ended, I had to jump into the second one. There was no way I couldn't know what was going on in that world after that first book ended. So, it was just, it's a sign of, like, a really talented writer. So yeah, I absolutely love The Rising by Brian King. Brian Keene. It's still easily one of the best zombie novels I have ever read in my life, and you absolutely need to check this out. And its sequel, which I believe is called City Infernal, or something. I don't have the paperback of the sequel, unfortunately, so I'd have to check my Audible listing, which I can't do because I'm recording on my phone. But definitely check this out if you're looking to get a breath of fresh air within the zombie genre. Banger of a novel. But yeah, those are my top 5 zombie novels that I feel break the mold within the subgenre. So that's going to be it for me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave a comment down below about your favorite zombie novels and ones that you think sort of break out from the horde and gain their own sentience within this overflooded subgenre. But thanks again, everyone. Until next time, be nice to yourselves. See you later.